gay? Is there a point to all these fancy clothes? With all these buckles from your head down to your toes? It's very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Is there something that you're trying to prove? With all the makeup and the way you move, are you looking for some sympathy? No, I'm trying to be the best girl I can be. It's very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Like my martinis dry, cosmos I won't deny. Smoke those long cigarettes. Thank God I'm not dead yet. Done all these crazy things, short of a wedding ring. Just
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Calista Solon, and you're watching nlcTrans. Tonight I'm here with my dear friends and co-hosts, Tara Alexander and Renee Benoit. And before I do anything else, I have to do this or I'll forget, because I tend to do that. I wanted to wish Daryl Finizio a happy birthday. Today is Daryl's birthday. And for those of you who don't know Daryl is very likely going to be a Democratic candidate for mayor in New London in the fall. So, in fact, we have to try to get a hold of Daryl and see if we can get him to come back on the show. Anyway, now that I've done that, welcome. Anyway, there's some interesting things going on, and we may actually be able to get you that B-roll that we didn't have time for last week. I think we've got that this week, right?
Yep.
And there are some interesting things going on as well that we could talk about. And
besides the heat wave?
Besides the heat wave, we'll probably do. We've been wanting to do sort of a the Trans 101, the trans primer thing, just so that people have some clue what's going on in this. So we'll probably do that anyway, if we have to. I'm a little red. I was out in the sun today. It's either that or it's the monitor.
Don't trust the monitor as the outgoing signal.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I was out today in the garden working in. That sun was hot. You're right. It's very, very hot. Anyway.
It's going to be very, very hot all week, and hopefully y'all can find
the beach.
A cool place. Not lying on hot sand under the baking sun.
No, on cool sand under an umbrella in the baking sun. Water. Yes. With a glass of wine. Anyway, yes.
Not that we advocate drinking alcohol while you're standing in the sun.
Yes. Anyway, we were just talking. We have a talk at Dade Kimball Hospital on the August 18th. Is that right? 18th, and before I forget, because I will, like I said, I tend to do that. We have been asked by Jill Espelin to come to her class at Central on October 31st. And I have to get back to her on that, so I needed to talk to you guys and see if...
on when?
October 31st.
Halloween.
In the morning. Halloween, yeah. It's Halloween. And I have to write to her and ask if we can come in costume. It could be fun. Anyway, it's a college class, They'll be in costume. No?
I don't think so.
I bet some of them will. Anyway, okay, so.
You know how you always talk about it's been a few years?
It's been a few years?
It's been a few years.
Since what?
Never mind.
I don't know.
Do you know what time her class is?
It's in the morning. It's at it's 9-something, 9:45, something like that. I will get you details on that, but it's on the morning of Halloween, Central Connecticut. So a little bit more of a drive than we're used to, but anyway, Jill used to teach at UConn and has now moved over to Central. So we're gonna.
She's still teaching nursing at Central.
Yeah. So we're gonna go. Yeah, she teaches nursing students, And so we're going to go
I
talk to
see her quite frequently because her mother lives 2 doors down from me. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, so Jill's a sweetheart, so we're going to go talk to her class. Anyway,
Sure.
I won't bore the audience with any more of that.
10:31.
10:31, yes.
uh,
Okay.
October
So-
31st.
Anyway, what's going on in the world? Anything good?
No.
No, okay.
No.
Thank you.
and can you add something else?
Yes, feel
In
free.
regards to next week, we have Linda Colangelo
Yes, we have
from
the help.
State Department of Health
Right.
from Brooklyn. And I guess she's supposed to be coming down with Sue, the director, as well.
And that's Brooklyn, Connecticut.
Yes, not Brooklyn, New York. No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's
So
cool.
that'll be good.
So they'll be on next week.
And I spoke to her briefly today, and she has some very good topics that is going to be on the show. So
Okay, cool. So that'll be next week.
So we'll have representatives from the health districts from both of the health districts that cover Eastern Connecticut.
no,
Just
the
northeastern Connecticut.
northeast, because
Okay.
the other one couldn't make it.
Okay.
Okay.
She had commitments, so other commitments.
And Jill also said that she would come on the show and probably bring students, so we'll have her on at some point, some point in the future. So, anyway, so,
Go back to my alma mater.
yeah, that's right, you were, you graduated from Central, huh?
After attempting to graduate from somewhere else.
Virginia Tech, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
A misguided attempt to become an engineer.
There's nothing misguided about that, it's just...
No, the attempt was misguided.
The
Not
okay.
becoming an engineer was misguided.
Okay. All right. Sorry. All right, being that there is no news today. Okay, you were kidding.
That'd be a misguided attempt at humor.
Oh, sorry. Which one of us was misguided? I'm sorry, go on. Please, take it away.
There was some news today about, my voice isn't all that great today, but Senate holds an historic DOMA hearing. Now, they don't expect anything to really come out of it because Congress isn't really in a mood to repeal DOMA. But they did, for the first time, have a major hearing. It was a committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, among whose members is our very own freshman senator.
Oh, who we like very much.
I'm pretty sure he's got a quote in here somewhere and I missed it. But the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on a bill to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, featuring testimony from a gay man from New Britain, as a matter of fact. Again, I don't know if that's in here, but he got married. His husband worked in was a veteran. I think worked in Veterans Affairs or something. And a few months after they got married, died from pancreatic cancer.
Ouch. That's unfortunate.
My brain's mush and I'm not remembering very well. Pretty sure. See, it was a I heard it on the radio, and this article isn't exactly what I heard on the radio, but and so because of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act section, Section 1 is the title of the act. Section 2 says that no state has to recognize a same-sex marriage performed in another state, and Section 3 says that for the purposes of all federal programs, a marriage can only be between a man and a woman.
Right.
And this was a revolutionary idea when they passed it, even though they were trying to implement status quo and let the states figure out what they wanted to do in regards to same-sex marriage. What the Defense of Marriage Act did was, for the first time, the federal government set up its own guidelines, its own standards by which it would measure marriage. Prior to the Defense of Marriage Act, the federal government, for the purpose of all federal programs and all federal benefits, the federal government considered you married if the state in which you resided considered you married. And by the federal government passing this bill into law, They effectively said what they claimed they were trying to do was set up, basically hold the status quo. Section 2 could have done that. No state has to recognize a marriage, same-sex marriage performed by another state. But Section 3 implemented for the first time a federal definition of familial relations, which has historically been a state's right.
Right.
So today we're in a situation where you can be legally married and file your taxes jointly here in the state of Connecticut and a few others. But when you go to file your federal taxes, you have to file them as individuals because the federal government will not recognize you as married. And in this case, these two men got married legally in the state of Connecticut in 2009. And 4 months after they were married, his partner died. And because of the Defense of Marriage Act, he's not entitled to be a beneficiary of the veterans' benefits, which amounted to 80% of the family income prior to his partner's death.
Sure.
And so he was not able to stay in the house. He was not able to, use the health care benefits because the federal government currently defines marriage when it's supposed to leave that up to the states. Ron Wall. No, so this is someone else, but it's a similar story. Ron Wallen, a 77-year-old resident of Indio, California, who in March lost his husband, Tom Corello, and may lose his home because he does not qualify to receive survivor's benefits as a result of DOMA.
Right.
After a lifetime of being a productive citizen, he says, I am now facing financial chaos. Tom and I worked hard, and together we tried to live out our own version of the American dream. And yet, as I face a future alone without my spouse of 58 years, it's hard to believe that it's the American government that is throwing me out of my family home. The hearing comes one day after the White House announced that President Obama would endorse the DOMA repeal bill. The president has long called for a legislative repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act, which continues to have a real impact on the lives of real people. It's entitled the Respect for Marriage Act, standing up for American values of the pursuit of happiness, personal responsibility, and treating others as you want them to be treated. Then they get into some of the back and forth, but the short of it is that they're probably not in any kind of mood for it, but as we've talked about, there's between 1,100 and 1,300 different benefits depending on what point in the government you count them, because things have been changing.
It's a lot.
Yeah, either way it's a lot. Not that people are entitled to all of them at once, but there are, we'll say 1,100 different things in the government that you are entitled to as a spouse or member of the nuclear family of a federal employee. Of anyone that's a veteran, anyone that served in the armed forces, anyone that served in a civil service job in the federal government, FBI, CIA, Department of Environmental Protection, any
on and on and on.
On and on and on. And the Section 3 of DOMA denies these people equal treatment under the law, according to the judges that have ruled against it.
Yeah, it has to go. That's crazy.
So that's the federal government. On a more local level, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Same-sex couples can't get divorced.
Yes, this is wonderful.
Gay divorce a higher hurdle than gay marriage. As thousands of gay and lesbian couples, this particular article was from NPR this morning, are planning weddings in New York, because New York just recently passed same-sex marriage, and celebrating their hard-fought right to marry, others around the nation are fighting for the right to divorce. Since most states and the federal government don't recognize same-sex marriages, same-sex couples are left with no way to officially split. For example, an out-of-state couple goes to Massachusetts to marry, or a couple who lives in a state, such as Connecticut, where they can marry, and then moves away from that state, can't get divorced. Because, for instance, in Massachusetts, you can't get divorced unless you're a resident of the state for at least a year. So, like in Massachusetts, you can go there for a weekend holiday and get married, but you have to become a resident for a year before you're eligible to receive a divorce in Massachusetts.
Well, that was clever thinking. Because, yeah, come on up here and get married, and then you're going to have to move here and live here for a year. We gotcha.
You know, or especially in this economy where people are following the jobs.
Yeah.
You know, you have a same-sex couple that moves somewhere, things don't end up working out like so many of the couples in this country, and they try to get a divorce. The state doesn't recognize them as married, it won't offer them the divorce.
So they're in limbo.
They're in limbo. The only thing they can do is walk away from each other and hope it never comes back to bite them. You know, and the question gets raised, you know, okay, so they walk away from each other. What if somebody wants to get into another marriage? Can they legally marry someone else? Can they legally go to Massachusetts and get married with someone else if they haven't been officially divorced from their first partner?
Yeah, that gets real interesting. Yeah, I can see a situation where you could do that and you'd wind up being okay in most places, but guilty of bigamy in certain states. This is crazy. So
it's like, okay, well, you thought you got legally married in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts recognizes your Connecticut marriage. So the marriage was actually null and void, but they can't prosecute you for it because you live in a state that doesn't recognize you as married to extradite you.
Right. It's crazy. It's just crazy.
So this personal example is nearly 3 years ago, Rhode Island resident, just around the corner from us, Lisa Lunt, split up with the woman she married in Massachusetts, and she's been trapped ever since. She says, "It puts me in an emotional and legal limbo. The consequences could be serious. If Lunt wants to marry again," this is what we were talking about, "would that be polygamy? And legally, could her ex claim half of her retirement?" Let's say nobody gets remarried, gets into a new relationship, and you go to retire. Your ex is entitled to half your retirement. If the state you're in allows her to go after that because of the... Yeah.
Yeah, this is nuts.
A woman that they're calling Amy, to protect her identity, married her partner in Connecticut and returned to her home state where gay marriage is not legal to start a family. Months after their baby was born, Amy's wife wanted out, and no court would hear Amy's claim to the child, who carried her last name. It was heartbreaking, she said, and lots of tears. Amy wants to remain anonymous because she's trying to get a judge to quietly grant her divorce under the radar. The court won't touch custody or property disputes, but she hopes a sympathetic judge might at least be willing to give his official stamp to an uncontested divorce, as long as it's all quiet. It's a gamble, and I'm at the whim of the judge, she says, but it's the best shot I have, and it would make such a difference to have that peace of mind.
Wow.
In the past, judges who are discovered to have gone out on a limb to grant same-sex divorces have been challenged, and their decisions are usually overturned in states that don't recognize same-sex marriage.
Right.
Even in states that do recognize same-sex marriage, divorce can still be a legal mess because same-sex marriages aren't recognized by the federal government or the IRS. For example, alimony payments are usually tax-free. But in Massachusetts, attorney Joyce Kaufman says the IRS has no guidelines on what to do if you're a gay divorcee. Many people are just keeping their fingers crossed, hoping they don't get audited.
Wow.
Another tricky issue in same-sex divorce is the length of the marriage. Courts divvy up property very differently when a couple has been together for 2 years as opposed to 20. But if a couple has been together for a decade before same-sex marriage was legal, how many years count? Some judges are now beginning to consider unmarried time together, but Kaufman says that often gets ugly when one ex inevitably tries to discount the early years together as just friends.
Oh, God.
So there have been efforts in many states to try to enable same-sex divorce. I mean, which is kind of funny because you've got people who don't want same-sex couples to get together legally in the first place, but when they try to separate, they don't want to let that happen either.
That's just mean.
Because that might acknowledge the fact that if we're going to recognize their ability to get divorced, then maybe eventually we'll have to recognize their ability to have been together.
Right.
But
Yeah, it's just a mess.
And she says in her interview, let's see if I can find it. No, that's basically the same stuff. Attorney Elizabeth Schwartz specializes in same-sex divorces in Florida. I've screamed about this for years. I mean, I can't tell you how many couples I know who don't even get to have their day in court, you know. They just have to walk away and they don't have another option, and that's really unfair. Even in states that do recognize, we do said that one, the IRS has no guidelines. She says, you'd be amazed at how quickly those 2 decades together, that you were together before you got married, become like we were roommates, we were friends. Because obviously the longer you've been married, the more likely it is your assets are going to be divided 50-50. Yeah, this infuriates folks like Lisa Lunt, the would-be divorcee from Rhode Island. She says it makes no sense, she says, for opponents of gay marriage to keep people like her from ending one. So yeah, opponents of gay marriage are forcing same-sex couples to stay together, legally stay together.
It's pretty crazy.
Because they don't want to acknowledge that some states allow it.
Yeah. Well, that's amusing, sort of.
It's amusing, but it is sort of a problem. It's
a very real problem. It's just, who'd have thought?
Well, and it's one of those things that could be addressed even through DOMA. You know, the Section 2 of DOMA says that a state does not have to recognize the marriage. But it doesn't say that they can't provide a mechanism for dissolving a civil contract from another state.
Right. Okay.
So the other little tidbit that we talked about the last couple weeks, but it's worth talking about again, is the Macy's Shop for a Cause. There's the information's up on our website, which is tallgroup.org. Shop for a Cause is a program that the Alliance for Living is doing with Macy's. The Alliance for Living being the only HIV/AIDS support organization in southeastern Connecticut. On Saturday, August 27th, you can shop at Macy's online or any one of the stores in the area. If you bring, I should back up, if you go to their website for $5, you can buy a discount coupon that will save you 25% on August 27th, and that one day only. The $5 you spend to get the coupon, to get the discount, the $5 goes directly to the Alliance for Living for their programs, and you save 25% off all your purchases at Macy's online or in stores on Saturday, August 27th.
Cool.
That's better.
That's a good deal. And certainly we like to support the Alliance for Living. So.
Yep. Their shopping pass, enabling staff, board members, and Alliance for Living members to continue to carry out our mission. And they actually have a little mission statement here if you're not familiar with the Alliance for Living. It says, the Alliance for Living is dedicated to the elimination of discrimination towards individuals and families who are affected by HIV/AIDS, to serving its members by providing medical case management, a housing program, food pantry and meals, employment counseling, and in promoting the elimination of HIV/AIDS within the entire community of southeastern Connecticut through an educational prevention program entitled Positively Speaking. Alliance for Living advocates on a national, state, and local level for the eradication of the disparity in housing, nutrition, and health care for those affected by HIV/AIDS. Shop for a Cause gives you the opportunity to give back to your community and to help the Alliance for Living. Purchase a $5 shopping pass for exclusive savings in every Macy's store and online at Macys.com on Saturday, August 27th. Alliance for Living keeps 100% of the proceeds, and you can enter to win a $500 Macy's gift card.
Cool. That's a good thing. So take advantage of that if you can. Anyway, so we have got probably just a little more than enough time to run that B-roll if you want to roll it.
Okay.
But we should probably sort of talk a little bit about it. And this is basically, as I remember it, I haven't seen it in a while, but I believe it was it's sort of a primer.
Yeah, it's entitled, I believe it's entitled Transgender Basics. It's put together by the LGBT, I think, Health Center in New York City. It's a primer on gender identity, gender expression, sex and sexual orientation, what the differences are, and how the science and the thinking about the sort of traditional heteronormative sexual binary is changing.
Yeah. So it's a good thing. It's an educational thing, and certainly good thing to watch.
The Gender Identity Project.
Yeah. So I guess we can probably roll that, and we'll have a few minutes to come back and talk when it's done.
Our culture likes to make things simple, and gender isn't.
It was the constant fight of me saying there's nothing wrong with being this kind of girl as opposed to, well, I'm not a girl.
We really see transgender as an umbrella term.
I know lots of people, lots of men, who have vaginas.
It's not always easy to be in the middle.
I so prefer someone to just treat me like a human being.
Our culture has a pretty simplified model of gender, or traditional gender model. A model that says someone whose body has a penis would be identified as male. They would behave in a stereotypically masculine way. They would identify themselves as a man, and they would date a woman. That's what our normative or traditional gender model is. Someone whose body, whose sex is what we consider female, has a vagina, would behave in a stereotypically feminine way, would then identify themselves as a woman, and would date men. A huge number of individuals in this world don't fit into those models.
I'm a trans man, female to male transsexual, but I identify primarily as a trans man.
I am a transgendered woman.
I identify as genderqueer because I feel like it's more accurate to how I feel in terms of my own gender identity.
People want to talk about transgender, and I always say you have to start by talking about gender. That's really the sort of critical piece in the word. I use a somewhat simplified version: sex, gender role, and gender identity. And the other piece I like to touch on is sexual orientation, largely because of its relationship to gender and the fact that sometimes people confuse it with gender. Sex is about physical characteristics, organic components in our bodies, anatomic aspects of who we are, sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone, and the chromosomes. And it's often strongly related to genitalia. What is gender role? Well, it's essentially a social understanding of how we are in a gendered sense in the world. It can be something that we do ourselves. It can also be something that other people see in us. And typically when you have a boy, you give the boy trucks, action figures. A girl, you might give dolls, sewing kits. These are very gendered decisions. We gender color, we gender clothing. It's fine for a girl to behave as in a masculine way, what we might call a tomboy, until she reaches puberty. And then she's supposed to sort of femme up, fit in within the more powerful gender stereotypes of what a woman's supposed to behave.
Because I felt different a lot, I think I overcompensated by doing things that were kind of like hyper feminine. You know, like I had long hair, I wore dresses, makeup.
Gender identity is nothing more than how we see ourselves in a gendered way. You can't look inside your body for it, it's inside your head, it's between your ears. People translate that into one of our common cultural choices, which is either man or woman. But clearly, gender has to be unique, because we're all too complex for us to state our gender in such a simple term. The relationship between gender and sexual orientation is important to discuss here. A lot of people think that one is the other and vice versa. When people say gay, they often think they're talking about trans at the same time. And I'd like to make a distinction that all gay people are not transgender and all transgender people are not gay. Everybody has both a gender and a sexual orientation. That's the traditional gender model. That's what our media uses, that's what our advertising uses, our films use that, our paperwork. When you go into an agency, people have to fill out paperwork. They ask you to check one box or the other. They don't give you any room for complexity. The traditional gender model doesn't actually fit large numbers of people, and we're really given two choices. We can either change the people or we can change the model.
When I was a really small child, I do basically remember feeling confused as far as my own gender was concerned.
There are times in my childhood that I did feel different in terms of my gender. Like, I never really thought there was something wrong with me or there's something different about my gender, because I don't think I ever really thought about it. I just knew that I wasn't as feminine as other girls, and I just felt kind of different.
The therapist asked me if I knew the difference between a boy and a girl, and I was just sort of like, and I think at the time, people were telling me that I was a boy, but I felt like a girl, so I didn't really think there was any difference. You know, I think I was 8 years old at the time.
For most people, the sex they were assigned at birth is a pretty good match with their gender identity. For transgender people, it becomes clear very often at a young age that their sense of themselves is different than what's reflected in the mirror, what's reflected when they look down at their bodies.
I would actually physically get ill all the time when I started to develop breasts, and I started to actually get to a place where my body was becoming more woman-like, and I didn't really understand it.
I wasn't comfortable in the assigned role of being a boy. I was born, and because I had a certain genital, situation. It was like, that's a boy, but I never felt that, and I don't think I was ever masculine in any way.
I was consistently challenged every single day about my gender. Somebody had to make some comment about it. Somebody had to say something about it. I was taunted by kids all the time.
And there was a lot of anxiety, I think, when I was growing up about how feminine I was. And my third grade teacher called my mother and said, "Your son is going to end up in New Orleans wearing a dress if we don't get him in therapy right now." So I think I grew up internalizing a lot of transphobia, that there was so much, and homophobia as well, there was so much anxiety about me being so feminine and trying to fix me.
There have always been people in different cultures and over time who would fit into the definition of people who live in a cross-gender way or who live outside the norms of just male or just female or just man and just woman.
I started having a lot of friends who were coming out as trans or as genderqueer, and I really didn't quite understand, and it just seemed really foreign to me. And as I started to learn, in an effort to try to understand what was going on with them, a lot of it rang true for me.
I actually met my first trans friend, and in the right moment, for whatever right reasons, he kind of just looked at me and said, "So how do you feel about your gender?" And I kind of broke down.
That's basically been my experience my entire life, that I don't really fit, that I'm an outcast, etc., etc. So that's the history. And so a lot of it for me, in terms of my process, is about trying to accept myself.
I felt really overwhelmed, not in a bad way, but definitely in a way that was 25 years in the making.
It was just really a relief to say, oh, like, I can identify as genderqueer.
An alternative to the traditional gender model would be a model that I would call the authentic gender model, one that actually represents everybody, all 6 billion people on our planet, using the same 4 components: sex, gender role, gender identity, and sexual orientation, but looking at each of those as being more complex than just one or the other, looking at them as a scale or a spectrum. We know that there are men that have breasts and there are women that have very small breasts or no breasts. We know that people's body hair differs, that people's chromosome structures differ, hormone levels differ, and we know that their genitalia differs. Our bodies are born differently. They also change over time. Some may choose to change their bodies, so that sex would have to be plotted differently for each individual.
Part of my own history as far as being a trans person is really understanding and really remembering every part of my transition and remembering what the struggle was that I went through in order to get to where I am today. I've had 2 surgeries and been on hormones for 5.5 years, and have paid a lot of money and have had to work really hard, and I'm really broke.
Gender roles do change over time, and they change within cultures. In sort of Western American culture, the only emotion that we really give and allow men to have is either anger or a sort of stoic pride. If men cry, we consider that feminine. But that's not the way in all cultures. In some cultures, men cry very openly and are expected to, and it's considered masculine behavior. So it's clear that it's not a genetic component of who a man is, and it's not a biological component, but crying or anger can be seen as social aspects of who we are.
Expressing my feminine spirit outwardly is crucial for me to be true to myself and for me to be happy.
The third component will be gender identity, something that's unique for each individual. So 6 billion people, 6 billion gender identities. Not even a spectrum or a scale, just individual points.
I never really felt like a lot of other people that I know in terms of being born in the wrong body. I feel pretty comfortable enough that I don't think that I'm going to physically transition. I don't know, things could change.
The final piece will be sexual orientation. Our traditional model likes to say that men date women and women date men. We know it's much more complex than that. We know that there are people that there are women that date women, there are men that date men, there are people that date both sexes or genders. Some people are attracted to transgender people, some people are celibate.
Because I date other masculine or people or men, I identify more with a gay male community or as a gay man than anything. I don't know. But I don't identify as a gay man.
So each of these aspects, where we're talking about sex, gender role, gender identity, or sexual orientation, is some sort of spectrum or scale, something vast and explosive as opposed to narrow and contracted.
One way to define transgender people is people who don't conform or identify with the expectations associated with the gender or sex they were assigned at birth.
You're constantly overly concerned about the rest of the world, because what does that mean? If I start to transition now, then I have to interact with the rest of the world. If I had just been dealing with myself, I think I would have come to terms with it sooner than I actually did. Now I'm very attached to my own identity being as a trans man.
People come from different places and different cultures and races and classes. So the terms that people use for themselves may really vary. People have really different terms and words that are used to identify themselves. Drag king, drag queen, bigendered, omnigendered, female to male, male to female, trans woman, transgender man, transsexual woman, femme queen, tranny, transgenderist. Another definition of transgender would be people who feel that the binary gender system of male and female doesn't leave enough room for their identities.
I don't identify as a man or a woman, and there have been times in my life when I have really conformed more to more traditional, like, femininity, but it never really felt that right for me.
A definition of genderqueer for a person might be someone who doesn't identify with the dichotomy of the norms of a man or a woman, who might feel somewhere in between. They might feel like somebody who identifies as a man and a woman, or neither a man or a woman, or something right in the middle. People assume that all of the transgender people out there are going through a medical gender transition. And we know that in the relative population of people out there who might be gender nonconforming, a relatively small number of people actually go through what would be considered a full medical transition.
They don't always understand that if I don't feel like a woman, as I was supposed to because I was born a female and socialized as female, then that must mean that I'm transitioning to be a man. And that doesn't really fit for me.
If you are in a situation where you work in an agency or someplace where you have a lot of contact with individuals coming in and in numbers, you've got to have some way to be able to equalize it so that transgender people will have the ability to identify themselves and have the space to do that and have you interact with them in an appropriate way.
People are looking at me and they have to give me an ultrasound on my lower abdomen, and they're looking at my paperwork, and it's just, you know, of course, it says something about checking for things like cysts, ovarian cysts, and all of this other business. I mean, the technicians are just like dumbfounded. Like, they really didn't know what to do. They really didn't understand what it was that they were looking at.
It's not always easy to know how people refer to themselves.
For me, I think it's really important that just on a gender level that she is used, her.
We can take a look at someone and see based on the way they're dressed or how they look. That might be an incorrect guess. The other way to find out would be something that sounds simple, which is to ask. To ask someone, how do you identify yourself? How do you identify your gender? What pronoun do you like to use?
I always really appreciate it when people ask me what my gender identity or my pronoun preference is.
The problem with asking is that sometimes people feel like it should be obvious based on how they look.
I think my presentation is fairly clear. I think, even if it might not be fully successful, what I'm going for, I think, is clear.
So asking might offend somebody, but one of the ways around that is to actually ask everybody their gender. At the center, we have intake forms and screening forms, so that everybody who walks through the door, we ask them their sexual orientation, we ask them their age, we ask them their race or ethnicity, and we also ask them their gender identity. So that allows us to actually have people self-identify, so we don't have to guess by looking at somebody what their gender is.
Sometimes it does feel like I'm putting myself on the chopping block, for sure. But I'd rather people ask questions, even if they're not nice questions, than not try to understand.
For me, there's so many other aspects of who I am beyond me being transgendered, and I think part of what upsets me is when people can't get past that.
One of the important things is to not just reduce a transgender person to only having this identity.
I work at bars, I go promote for events and benefits, and I'm not a morning person.
I'm an artist. More than anything, I think I'm an artist.
I'm Chinese American, I'm a performance artist, I am a therapist, I'm a dog owner, you know, like all these different things.
It is so painful to live a lie. It really is, and it's so freeing to be true to yourself. And we should be applauded for that. We should not be persecuted for that. We should not be discriminated against and denied services, housing, jobs for that. We should be celebrated, and we should be valorized. And I think that's what I want to say to people.
Welcome back, and thanks for bearing with us and watching that. That's kind of a good little piece of film that we have, and I believe that was care of the Gender Identity Project, was it?
Yep.
And we like to run that once in a while, especially for a new audience. And I suspect we've got at least some new audience members out there, just to sort of Trans 101. Because we talk about this stuff a lot, and I'm not gonna get, because we're almost out of time, so I'm not gonna get crazy on this tonight. But we do talk about this a lot, and people sort of have these ideas about gender and about the gender binary and how it all works. And guess what?
Yeah.
it's all wrong.
Nature's filled with diversity.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's something that I've learned through the years, is that things are often not what you think they are.
Even something you'd assume is as quote-unquote fundamental as sex. Well, humans must be born as either male or female. And it's like, well, sure, except 1 in 2,000 female births are trisomed XXY. So if someone has XXY, does that make them male or female?
Yeah, right.
You start to get into that, and we'd figure...
There's a lot of that.
There's a lot of that. It boils down, if you take into account all the genetic and phenotypal developmental issues that could have an impact on your gender, your sex, your gender identity, it's like 1 out of 100 births.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is some way sexually developmentally different from what people assume is normal.
Yeah.
And I'm sure most people out there, if you're working, you probably work with more than 100 people.
Mm. Yeah, so it's an amazing thing. It really is, and so.
So if you know me, you're covered, because I'm probably the one.
Yeah, if you know all of us, you're in trouble.
You get away with knowing like 300 other people without having to worry about.
Yeah.
But
so it is amazing though, how much diversity there really is,
Yeah.
and so.
And along those lines, I think it's important to note at this point, since we are doing the 101, that the American Medical Association, the AMA, and then the 2 APAs, the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association, have all come out in support of the science that transgender men are male, transgender women are female, should be treated with dignity in the medical arenas. They recognize the medical need for transition for those individuals that are experiencing significant dysphoria. These things are no longer disputed in the scientific world.
Right.
And at least, well, I should be less broad, from the AMA, the APA, and the APA.
Right.
It's not disputed.
Yeah, there are certainly those that would try to argue that, and are very good at using old information.
Yeah.
To try to say
30-year-old information.
Yeah, which is
and fear.
Yeah. Obviously, and we probably will talk about some of those organizations, like organizations like the FIC we were talking about earlier, but we're not going to have time to do that tonight because we're just about out of time. But we just kind of wanted to show you that just because it's kind of a cool piece of film. I like that film,
and those 4 bars are actually something we've adopted. It's been picked up by GLAAD, the gay, lesbian, legal,
Yeah.
GLAAD is our, go ahead. Do you remember?
Sorry.
It's out of Boston, they're the LGBT lawyers.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so we're out of time, but that's a great piece of film, and I hope you enjoyed that, and certainly we can talk lots about this in the future. But
for the next 2 weeks, we have some very interesting guests coming up. Next week, we have the public health representatives from northeastern Connecticut, and the week after that, we have Reverend Josh Pollack from the Connecticut Clergy for Full Equality.
Yes, which will be very cool. So.
Tune in.
Yeah, so please join us again next week, and I think we're all done. So thanks so much for watching us, putting up with us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.